I grew up in rural northern New Mexico where the light pollution is non-existent. That makes for some pretty stellar stargazing if you looked up. But facing forward, that utter darkness just seemed endless. As a kid, I was always nervous about doing nighttime chores for my dad, because I didn't know what was out there, what was waiting for me. Welcome to After the Fact. For the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'm Benny Martinez.
You've got these different animals that have been imaginatively entitled, say, the gummy squirrel, or Casper the octopus, or the flying spaghetti monster.
You see, these are the names of creatures that, as a kid, I might think up in my head, worrying about them every step I took in the darkness. But that was Pew's Julian Jackson, naming some very real animals that thrive in a cold, dark place, the deep sea. It's a place with no light, near freezing temperatures, and crushing pressure that would kill a land dweller instantly. But to quote Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. So contrary to what you might think, the deep sea is full of creatures that have adapted to handle these extremes. It makes up 90% of the marine environment, yet recent science suggests we've seen less than 0.01% of it. But we're working on that. The documentary, How Deep Is Your Love, tells the story of taxonomists and captures their quest to understand the animals they pull up from the depths.
Maybe it's taken in water there and storing it. That's what gets used for hydraulics.
I don't know. Probably nobody knows. This is the point. Nobody knows exactly how it works.
The deep sea started to infiltrate my consciousness. I started reading about the deep sea, became aware that a lot of it doesn't technically belong to any nation. I was really interested in what that might mean for us as humans. Like, how do we relate to this place that most of us have never seen?
In 2021, Eleanor Mortimer was living on a boat when Jacob Thomas, a friend she'd known since film school, came over for dinner with his wife, Muriel. Now, Muriel was a marine biologist working with taxonomists at the Natural History Museum in London. And like any dinner party, as much as you try to avoid it, their conversation turned to work. But we can give these three a break here because the discussion got pretty deep pretty quickly. Pun intended.
We started talking about the deep sea, and I was like, wow, this is crazy because I'd never heard of a taxonomist.
Taxonomists. Those are the scientists who discover and name new species.
I was so naive. I had no idea there were new species. I thought we'd found everything, but it makes sense, right? The deep sea is completely unknown, and there are all these new species, and there are these scientists who are finding them, describing them, giving them names. And that was when I thought, there's a film here. And Jacob was like, okay. Eventually he was like, okay, yeah, we'll make a film.
In the film, you cite the statistic that 90% of the life forms in the deep sea have yet to be discovered. That's pretty shocking to me. What else going through this process shocked you in terms of how little we know about the deep sea?
As a filmmaker, I'm all about observing and viewing the world. And when I discovered that actually much less than 1% of the seafloor has ever been seen by humans, it just blew my mind, because suddenly for me, like, the imagination comes into play. You know, what is down there? We're talking about a huge percentage of the surface of the earth. This is not a small place.
And Jacob, what about you?
Part of what really drew us to this is that people were making decisions about something that we knew so little about. And those decisions weren't necessarily being driven by information or science. People have been studying the deep sea for a long time. And so it's not really fair to dismiss all the work that's gone over the decades that they've been studying it. But we still really only have a snapshot of what's down there.
We're lucky enough to have been able to watch How Deep Is Your Love? And some of these creatures the taxonomists found were like the first representatives of their species. How did that feel, being there to capture that on footage?
It was like a kind of electric atmosphere on a ship with the scientists as they sent the robot down, and we'd all be completely glued to the live stream, because at any moment you might look away and something, amazing kind of comes in. I think I was very sleep deprived the whole time because I just didn't want to go to sleep. These are 12-hour long dives and the scientists are on shift. But I'd be there like trying to keep filming, thinking I would get a bed and then the giant squid would come on the screen.
Oh, that's, yeah. There they are.
I mean, it's like encountering another world.
There's growing interest in something else down there too: seabed mining. Mineral-rich rocks, called polymetallic nodules, grow on the seafloor over millions of years and could be used to help manufacture things like cell phones or EV batteries. We've only explored a fraction of the deep ocean, and taxonomists are discovering new species with nearly every dive to the seafloor. But the creatures themselves could hold something more valuable than minerals, what scientists call marine genetic resources, DNA that could be the key to unlocking new medicines and discoveries we haven't yet imagined. That's why Pew supports a moratorium on seabed mining until science catches up, because when it comes to the deep sea, we don't know what we don't know.
The ISA is at a crossroads. It is up to you, members of this assembly, which path to take. A pathway towards accelerated, unregulated extraction that will cause damage to the seabed that will outlast humanity.
You might recognize that voice. That's Pew's Julian Jackson addressing the International Seabed Authority in How Deep Is Your Love? I had a chance to catch up with him recently about his work protecting the deep sea. Hey, Julian, thanks so much for being here. Tell us a bit about what you do at Pew and why Pew as an organization has a keen interest in seabed mining.
Yeah, thanks, Benny. I've been working in the international biodiversity policy space for almost 20 years now, but I joined Pew about 10 years ago. My particular focus is on deep seabed mining. Pew has obviously a rich history in marine conservation, and deep seabed mining has a potential to impact on lots of the work that Pew has done. We're concerned that if it is done at all, it's done in an environmentally responsible way, that it doesn't undermine all the other marine ecosystems that Pew has been working hard over the years to protect.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty about seabed mining, let's set the stage a little bit. So all I know is that there's no light, there are freezing temperatures, and immense pressure. So I would imagine that for many people, and I'm including myself in this group, we're largely in the dark about what exists at the bottom of the ocean. So can you paint a picture for our listeners?
So life looks very different, but there's definitely life down there, and it's older, and arguably because it's older, it's more biodiverse than anything that we see on land. But you've got to imagine that because there's so little food at the bottom of the ocean, the life is actually very slow moving, but the life cycles also take a very long time as well. What I consider a great sort of iconic species of the deep is the Greenland shark. This is a shark that can live for up to 500 years. It takes up to 150 years before it reaches sexual maturity. So it means that it's going to be challenging for us to understand the impact of the mining in a short amount of time. It's going to be very sensitive to any changes and will take a very long time to recover if anything happens, given that an entire generation will take 150 years.
Let's talk about the stakes here for a second. Why is there interest at all in what exists at the depths of the ocean?
Good question.
We try. We do our best here at After the Fact.
I think it must be 150 years ago. HMS Explorer discovered some nodules at the bottom of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone.
These are the rocks growing on the seafloor that I mentioned earlier.
At the time, nobody knew what they were and nobody thought much of it. Fast forward to about 30, 40, 50 years ago, people are understanding that these nodules contain concentrations of cobalt, copper, nickel, and manganese. And these were thought to be helpful minerals for industrial applications, battery minerals or general construction. These nodules are millions of years old and take a very long time to actually form. So they form naturally around, say, for example, a shark's tooth that has fallen through the water column, and then the minerals accrete around this. But it's worth bearing in mind that these are not necessarily commercially viable, so they're still a theoretical source of minerals.
And the world's highest concentration of nodules live at the bottom of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. It spans roughly 1.7 million square miles of the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Mexico.
What's interesting, though, about the Clarion-Clipperton Zone is that this is in international waters. So it's underneath the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. These minerals have the status of common heritage of humankind. So they are owned by none of us and all of us at the same time. So that's a super hard challenge for the International Seabed Authority, the international institution that's responsible for overseeing any exploration and exploitation of minerals.
Speaking of exploration, we spoke with Eleanor Mortimer and Jacob Thomas, the director and producer of a film called How Deep Is Your Love, where they document an expedition to the Clarion-Clipperton Zone with some taxonomists who are exploring the deep sea. And we've got a sneak peek of that film. And I got to say, these nodules that you're talking about, maybe the size of grapefruits, look like black rocks, but they pepper the seabed floor. And it's that ecosystem that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
So talk to me a little bit about the disruption of mining can cause to the ecosystems and what's at stake.
As the producers of How Deep Is Your Love has shown, that the taxonomists are only just starting to understand the sea life that is down there. You've got these different animals that have been imaginatively entitled, say, the gummy squirrel or Casper the octopus or the flying spaghetti monster. So these are great names for creatures for a podcast. But what's really interesting is that every time there's a dive, new species keep being discovered. We're only just understanding what they are. We don't quite yet understand the next part of the problem, which is their life cycle. So we don't understand how any mining will impact on them. And I think most importantly for us and as humans, what's the impact on not just the immediate ecosystem, but the wider ecosystem? So if we don't know what the creatures we're talking about, we don't know the life cycles properly, then we don't also understand the implications that any mining would have on the ecosystems and the ecosystem services that the deep ocean provides.
So broken down to its core, this is an issue of what we don't know. So let's pump the brakes and spend some time to figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. There's been several studies looking at how do we answer some of those known knowns and unknown unknowns, but estimates of what we need to do to understand that have suggested that we need decades worth of science before we fully understand some of these issues. So a long time and a lot of investment is still required before we can say with any confidence that we're able to mine in any way that is environmentally friendly.
When a remote operated vehicle lands on the seabed, there's a cloud of sediment. It's very dramatic, actually looks like a moon landing. And then when that clears, you see a lot of these rocks. There's just millions of them. And then there's life forms and animals that live on and amongst these rocks.
One of the curious elements about the film that I found is, because of the expedition to the deep sea, these taxonomists are looking to document the different species or the different organisms they find there. And as sophisticated as this deep sea diving robot was, the claw that it had attached to it didn't seem so dexterous. I think they were trying to pick up a sea cucumber that just escaped its grasp.
You think of a claw game in an arcade or something like that, but most of those claw games, you're working in 2 dimensions. You can go side to front, forward and back and side to side, and the claw just drops down. Whereas this, you're working in 3 dimensions, plus you've probably got a time lag between your input on the claw control and what the claw does. And then you've got all the pressure of trying to pick something up without damaging it. So I have a lot of sympathy for them. And there's a couple of moments where they really struggle to pick it up, but then there's a lot of moments where they're surprisingly dexterous with it.
This is a film that follows taxonomists on an expedition and understanding how they categorize the different organisms that they encounter. But what I found a little whimsical was that each of the taxonomists themselves was categorized as Homo sapiens and then their actual name.
I think right from the beginning, we had conversations about who are the characters of this film. And actually, we wanted the animals to be characters alongside the people. So we wanted to place the viewer outside as much as possible of the kind of anthropocentric human way of looking at the world and zoom out and see us as humans, as another species here on Earth. Something I felt being on a ship for that long is that you are completely interdependent with the other people on that ship for survival. And for me, that became a kind of microcosm of like how, as a species, we are more vulnerable than we think in terms of who we're dependent on for survival. We are dependent on the natural world.
Let's continue pulling on that thread a little bit and take a step back and talk about the marriage of art and science. It is a film that's trying to raise awareness for an issue that the average person might not know about. But arguably, I think you're also contributing to science by capturing some of the only footage of these animals and organisms. So talk to us a little bit about that.
You could make a film that was a lot opinions about deep sea mining, people for and against, and all the reasons why we should or shouldn't. And one of the actually joyful things about working quite in close collaboration with the scientists in the film is that their outlook on the world is about questioning. For me, science and art are not so opposite in the sense that they're both about asking questions and exploring the conundrums of life.
Let's talk about love for a second. The film is titled, How Deep Is Your Love? How deep is your love for the deep sea?
Good question. I hold a lot of love and appreciation for this kind of magical space that is extremely ancient. And I think it would be a huge mistake to just like make quick decisions because it doesn't come back.
Maybe we didn't know how much we loved the deep sea when we started this project, but I think that seeing what lives down there and also seeing how deeply the scientists, these taxonomists, love what's down there. And that was one of the things that we're always asking ourselves as we were making it. Will this love translate? Will people get this? Will people fall in love with this weird, gloopy animal? And it was always like, hopefully they will, because they'll see how much this other person can love that animal.
I did find myself gravitating or feeling a little emotional to one particular creature called the Barbie pig. It's just this bright pink, funny looking creature that just swims in a very peculiar way. Curious, after having gone through this experience, what your favorite sea creature is from the deep sea.
I feel terrible because in a film about taxonomy, I don't know the name of this particular animal, but there's a worm that swims around. It's a spiky, spiny worm.
I think my favorite is one that's been nicknamed the headless chicken monster. This animal can swim. It's translucent and pink and purple and ejects its guts out to defend itself from any threats. And I just think it's very inventive. I love it.
Inventive might be putting it lightly.
There's one thing we haven't touched on yet, and that's how seabed mining is actually governed. Right now, the power lies with the International Seabed Authority, or the ISA. And the ISA was created through the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That's the international agreement that sets out how countries can use the world's oceans. It covers everything from international fishing rights to the seabed beyond national borders. I'm back with Julian Jackson. In the film, How Deep Is Your Love? They're not allowed to record or film the convenings, but we were able to hear some voices. I'm pretty sure your voice was in there. So, a little plug for Julian Jackson and Pew Charitable Trust. But talk to me about your perspective on the governance that exists or lack thereof and how that might change in the not so distant future.
What's really fascinating is you've got a group of 40 or so countries who make up what's called the International Seabed Authorities Council. And it's a little bit unique in that you've got a multilateral system trying to create the nitty-gritty, fine details to govern a frontline industry that will be taking place thousands of miles offshore in international waters, thousands of meters below the surface, for an activity that we know is going to be damaging. And then you've also got other multiple responsibilities that the ISA has to carry out that potentially produce a sort of conflict of interest. The Convention of the Law of the Sea, that says that it has to have these certain functions and a dual function of overseeing the mining activity, collecting any revenue from the mining activity, dispersing it, and perhaps even providing sanctions. And that's why these rules are taking a long time. And it's quite right that we take the time to do this right. And in the meantime, Pew has been suggesting we have a moratorium on seabed mining to make sure we're not pressured and we're not rushed into creating hasty rules, and we don't start mining before we fully understand the risks and have in place the checks to ensure that the marine environment can be properly protected.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what's underway to improve the scientific understanding of what exists, and why should someone focus on this issue or care about something like this that's happening miles into the ocean and miles deep?
So I think the thing that people probably can think about and understand the most are the thresholds of impact. So what's going to be the sources of harm and the levels of harm, and what does that mean for them? The ISA has identified that there are a number of thresholds that they need to agree upon. So that's how much noise pollution, how much light pollution, how much toxicity, how much turbidity. So that's how much muck there is in the water and how toxic that could be to me. If we're talking about toxins, what's the interconnection between where some of the damage happens on the bottom of the ocean versus the midwater? Because there will be this return of mud and toxins from the broken up nodules going into the midwater column. And we know that has the potential to spread very far. And we know that it will also dissolve certain chemicals, and that can have impacts. Then the other sort of impacts that people think about in terms of the wider ocean health, and what really keeps me awake at night, is what happens to the oceanic carbon cycle.
Julian explained that ecosystems of microscopic organisms capture and store carbon in the ocean. Some experts are concerned that mining could disrupt these ecosystems, potentially releasing stored carbon or weakening the ocean's ability to absorb it in the future.
And that's why someone should care about this, even though it's thousands of miles offshore.
Now, I posed this question to both Eleanor and to Jacob at the close of yesterday's interview, and their film is titled How Deep Is Your Love? But to you, how deep is your love for the deep sea? And how does that express itself in your everyday life?
I'm always astounded by the footage that these scientists come back with. So it's super inspiring to see the variety of life and how life can actually find its way in the deepest and darkest places. And the fact that you've got these creatures that are around for such a long time, that we're scurrying around on the surface in some ways, but they're just doing their own thing at a much different pace of life. It also suggests how fragile that world is compared to the sort of impacts that we might have that are long-lived.
Thanks again for listening. And if you're interested in learning more about how the ocean is shared and protected, be sure to listen back to our December 2025 episode called The Treaty That Could Save the Ocean. And for our U.S. listeners, keep an eye out for Eleanor and Jacob's film, How Deep Is Your Love, releasing here this fall. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to After the Fact wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Benny Martinez, and this is After the Fact from the Pew Charitable Trusts. Until next time.